Hi everyone, Deep the Knee Breath Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for another edition of the YUNOREVIEW, where I talk about a bunch of releases, but I haven't had the time to do a formal review on gauntlet style, one after the other in a brief opinion format. It's explained, you know what it is, you know what we're gonna do, so now let's do it! New record from Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. Yes, that is a band name. They've been around a while though, and considering how popular psychedelic music, specifically psychedelic music from Australia, is at the moment, it's no surprise that I get so many requests for this band. And look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. They, and specifically this record, sounds a lot like King Gizzard. It sounds a lot like King Gizzard. I mean, there are very noticeable, stylistic separations in that I think the band's approach on this LP is a little heavier, a little speedier, a little punchier, maybe not as experimental or, abstract sonically, but certainly checks all of those necessary psych boxes with a serious punch, a serious impact. I don't know, if you're a diehard for this sound, give it a listen. You'll most likely be into it. It's not so derivative that it's disgusting, but it's not anything new under the sun when it comes to this style. And, as a result, I don't really have too many things to say about it. This project, Fievel, is Glauque, which I am 110% sure I am not pronouncing correctly, is having a bit of an interesting breakout on the internet at the moment, specifically on the Bandcamp platform, as it features some very lo-fi, Frenchy, jazz, and progressive pop music, which is delivered in this series of very short songs and recordings that seem like they're done in a single take with a single mic. It's very raw, but still very compelling. Despite how, I guess, low budget the recording seems, the instrumentation is still very well balanced, and the performances for the most part sound quite nice. There are a lot of spots and ideas that I wish extended and went a bit further, but certainly it's got a vibe to it. It's got an energy to it. I guess I just wish the compositions were a bit more robust at the end of the day. But having said that, this is still one of the most unique projects I've heard this year. Again, if you are into a lot of French songwriting, jazz, and pop, and hearing all of that mixed together into a somewhat lo-fi soup, try it out. Been hearing quite a bit about singer and songwriter Arlo Parks this year, and this project collapsed in Sunbeams, and I could see why. I mean, there is a strong contingent of up-and-coming artists at the moment that are really all-arounders, doing a bit of bedroom pop, indie pop, R&B, maybe a bit of neo-soul in the mix there too, and while Parks seems to do it all quite capably, almost in this early Frank Ocean nostalgia ultra-genre chameleon type of way, there are still numerous spots on this project where the songwriting and the vocal performances don't really go far enough to leave much of an impression. So while this thing is definitely pleasant while it's on, it could be doing something, I think, to either push boundaries or just generally be more memorable. New record from legendary rock outfit Melvins, and while I do love a lot of the heavy, sludgy, and occasionally thrash-inspired riffs throughout this project, I'm just not really liking much the vocals and lyrics at all this time around. I feel like the band is trending in a direction where their sound and their delivery is almost getting too zany, to where it's, I guess, almost like flirting with being a comedy record or like a Weird Al record or something. I know the band has always had like, a bit of a wild, weird, tongue-in-cheek side, but it's almost overtaking the whole package on this one, and I'm just not feeling the results. This new Boldy James project that dropped at the tail end of last year that I was really anticipating, considering how much I enjoyed Manger on McNichols, but as much as I thought some of the teasers from this were dope, my fear going into it is that I would not enjoy it as much as Manger because the production was not as ambitious, or, that element wouldn't be there to make up for Boldy's very low-key, very monotone, one-dimensional rap style and delivery. And, that kind of ended up being the case. On top of it, Boldy's lyricism didn't seem quite as crushing and personal here as it was on Manger, which I think is also a bit of a letdown. While I get this is Boldy's style and I totally understand his underground pedigree, there's just not enough here to give this project that extra oomph that I'm looking for. New record from Ghetts, one of Grime's modern heavy hitters, and it seems like he put a lot into making this record as big and as versatile as it is, but I'm still not getting a lot out of it, despite enjoying a lot of his more aggressive and just hard-hitting bangers over the years. This one to me reads a lot like that breakout record that Stormzy had, years back, where he's doing a little bit of everything. You have your pure grime cuts, then you have this slog of tracks that are trying to go for a much more commercial appeal, many of which totally miss the mark and don't really leave much of an impression and just feel very watered down and are shooting for a more wide appeal but aren't even really that catchy. When we eventually get another project from Ghetts into the future, I would either love for it to go back to basics, go back to the strengths that we know he does well, or just find some way to improve upon these more pop-style tracks so they actually still go off with a bang and are memorable. I gotta say, this is one of the most uninspired trap records I've heard in a while. Like, this really has nothing to it whatsoever. Boring flows, average vocal delivery and style, instrumentals are bland as hell. I mean, maybe this is exciting to you if, you think Kodak Black is, the most interesting original rapper under the sun. But outside of that context, I just don't see how this flies. Vampire Weekend has saw fit to put out this remix project for the song 2021, where you have two 20-minute versions of the song from different artists, one of which delivers unto us this abstract, lengthy instrumental revision of it that makes it just not even really listenable. And then the second track is a progressive jam band version of the song, which is not exactly my cup of tea, but I think is the more enjoyable of the two tracks. It's not something I will ever go back to, but it's certainly interesting to point at and say, hey, this weird thing happened. Try it out, maybe? New project Terminus from artist extraordinaire, Mr. James Ferraro. Of course, going in a surprise direction on this new one where, he's working with more of those MIDI sounds, but what we're getting here is this dark, experimental, harsh, electronic body music progressive synth project with a lot of very, very aggressive vocal performances too, screamed vocal performances. I mean, it's almost bordering on black metal how harsh some of these tracks are. And, once you listen to the overall vibe and aesthetic of the record, it's got this real, throwback 80s sci-fi, or I guess a technological dystopian future soundtrack type of vibe. It really is the kind of music that you want to hear when Skynet is taking over and destroying all of us with machine gun carrying robot drones marching through the streets. Shout out to Gatecreeper on this new EP that has a pretty interesting build. The whole first portion of it is a lengthy series of short tracks that are a minute or so, landing in that range, and they just grind and just power through all these heavy, blistering cuts that are really fast, breakneck, dizzying, overwhelming. It's even difficult on the fourth listen to get a grasp and a handle of much of it. But then the entire thing ends off with this amazing 11-minute multi-phased monster where they're going through like one heavy extreme genre after the next. There are portions where it's sludgy, it's black metal inspired, it's death metal inspired, maybe a little bit of emo or post-rock undertones. It's kind of crazy. It's really nuts how one-dimensional the band is at one point on this thing, and then how they go above and beyond experimenting with like everything but the kitchen sink on the final track. I can't say I love it on the whole, but it certainly gives a new perspective to the band and their abilities, and their creative process too. New record from the band Suffering Hour, which I have been seeing make waves on the internet in the metal community, and for good reason. It's some really decent blackened death metal, or death black metal. I'll say instrumentally the foundation of this thing, it does have a strong, like black metal type of demeanor to it, with the chord progressions, with the drum beats, and then on top of that you do have those deep growled death metal style vocals. And then to sort of throw the mix off a little bit further, the guitar tone is unlike what you would usually hear in either genre. It's very watery, it's very washed out, and has almost like a spooky chorus effect on it that might even be more fitting for like some really old school aggressive punk influenced goth rock. Now, granted, it's very odd to hear all these sounds together. It is an interesting sonic dynamic. But that being said, I wasn't really all that crazy about the band's songwriting ability. There wasn't really much about the compositions here that struck me as being all that novel or memorable. The performances I thought were so-so as well. So I don't know, there were elements of this thing that underwhelmed me, and there were elements of its sonic characteristics that hit me as, okay, that's pretty novel. I haven't heard a band do it quite like that at this point. But once you get past that, or once I got past that, there wasn't a whole lot underneath those floorboards that was blowing me away. New record from Nothing Nowhere, Trauma Factory, which I was pretty excited to listen to based off of a few teasers that seemed to bring together elements of industrial hip-hop and punk and emo, and I haven't heard too many groups like try to make those worlds work together, and in my opinion, it seemed like Nothing Nowhere was doing that. But then when I actually listened to this LP, my God, like 90% of the tracks on this thing are boring as hell and bland, just boringly produced, like Lil Peep knockoffs almost as if it was just Lil Peep, but like way less interesting. Lyrics for the most part didn't really stand out. Intro cut was super corny, awful poetry read over an instrumental I don't even remember at this point. I guess the whole thing got a little bit more bite in the second half, but I don't know. If Nothing Nowhere is going to stay afloat into the future, I feel like it needs to hit a little bit harder, and I guess it was just kind of disappointing given just how aggressive and crazy the teasers were coming right out of the gate, but then just went right downhill as soon as I put the entire record on. Third Lost Themes album from John frickin' Carpenter, one of the best to ever do it in the soundtrack world, and in pure John Carpenter fashion. You have a lot of very eerie, dystopian progressive synth work on this thing with a super analog flair, and quite a few, I guess I'll say epic instrumental rockers on this one as well that have a strong and steady groove that sound great. It's got a touch of the old school to it, obviously, but a modern punch to it as well. There's certainly some synthier, more spacious cuts that don't do too much for me, and I guess at the end of the day, and this is John Carpenter's bag, it does sound like it's meant to just be kind of a soundtrack for something. But, if you love soundtrack music, if you love old school soundtrack music, if you love progressive synth music, if you love bands like Zombie, or even if you're a huge fan of, franchises such as Stranger Things, whose, instrumental aesthetics, whose soundtrack aesthetics borrow very heavily from, the John Carpenter legacy, give this thing a listen. You'll most likely have a lot of fun with it. Singer-songwriter Richard Dawson, who we've had lots of very nice things to say about in past reviews, low-key dropped a pandemic record in the midst of 2020 via Bandcamp, and while he does describe it as a dog's dinner of sorts, it does still have a lot of interesting ideas on it. I don't think anybody is sort of under the impression this is like one of his most fantastic and thorough and robust releases to date, but given how eclectic and wild and out there a lot of Richard's musical ideas and compositions are, even the stuff that seems really rough around the edges is certainly worth trying. And if you are a fan of his early stuff, which is also like, you know, pretty gnarly to a degree recording and composition wise, there should be no, you know, difficulty in kind of transitioning over to what he's trying to attempt here. So yeah, you know, if you like your folk very left field and abstract, give this one a listen. Zishin, have you given any of these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best, what should I review next? If you like this, over here next to my head, it's another video that you can check out. Hit that upworthy link to subscribe to the channel, huh? YUNOREVIEW forever.